"I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate," Bradley announced with a smug grin, his voice echoing through the courtroom like he was announcing lottery numbers. The confidence in his tone made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to remain calm in my seat at the defendant's table. "My name is Judith Crawford. I'm 45 years old, and I never imagined I'd be sitting in a divorce court in Nashville, Tennessee, watching my husband of 5 years attempt to steal everything I'd worked for my entire life." Bradley sat across the room with his attorney, looking like he'd already won the lottery. His expensive suit, one I'd paid for, of course, was perfectly pressed, and his golden hair was slicked back in that way that used to charm me but now made me sick. "Your Honor," Bradley's attorney continued, "my client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the substantial inheritance Mrs. Crawford received during their marriage." The lawyer's briefcase was stuffed with documents, all of them outlining how Bradley planned to walk away with my grandmother's hard-earned money. I watched the courtroom spectators lean forward in their seats, clearly fascinated by what they assumed would be a massive financial settlement. Some of them were probably calculating the numbers in their heads, wondering how much Bradley would walk away with. A few reporters had even shown up, drawn by whispers of a multi-million-dollar divorce case involving a prominent Nashville businesswoman. Judge Richardson, a stern woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, reviewed the initial paperwork with a neutral expression. She'd been presiding over family court for over 20 years, and I imagined she'd seen every trick in the book. But something told me she hadn't seen what I was about to reveal. Bradley turned slightly in his chair to flash me what he probably thought was a victorious smile. The audacity of it made my blood boil. This was the same man who used to bring me coffee in bed, who claimed he loved me for who I was, not what I had. 5 years of marriage, and it had all been a lie. The courtroom felt oppressive, with its dark wood paneling and the weight of legal proceedings hanging in the air. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of Nashville traffic, people going about their normal lives while mine was being dissected in front of strangers. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the envelope inside that would change everything. "Mrs. Crawford," Judge Richardson addressed me directly, "do you have any response to these claims?" I stood slowly, my heart pounding but my resolve stronger than ever. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when Bradley's greed would finally catch up with him. "Your Honor, I believe there's something the court needs to see." Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier in our relationship. Bradley had swept me off my feet during a particularly vulnerable time in my life. I'd just turned 40 and was running my consulting firm, Bright Veil Analytics, with modest success, but little time for romance. My grandmother had been my closest companion until her death 3 years before I met Bradley, and I was still grieving her loss when he appeared at a business conference in Memphis. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my work helping small businesses optimize their operations. "You're brilliant," he'd say, watching me review financial reports. "I've never met anyone who understands numbers the way you do." At the time, I thought he was impressed by my intelligence. Now I realized he was calculating my net worth. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners and romantic getaways. Bradley worked as a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, but he always seemed to have money for lavish dates. "I believe in investing in the people I care about," he'd say when I questioned his spending. I was flattered by his attention and generosity, not realizing he was already planning his long-term investment strategy. When Bradley proposed after 8 months, I was hesitant. My grandmother had always warned me about men who moved too fast, but Bradley was persistent. "Life's too short to wait," he insisted. "I know what I want, and I want you." His proposal was elaborate. A private dinner on a riverboat with a quartet playing our favorite songs. The ring was stunning, probably worth more than his annual salary, though I didn't think about that at the time. My attorney, Patricia Holbrook, had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. "Any successful businesswoman needs protection," she'd explained. "It's not romantic, but it's practical." I'd felt awkward bringing it up with Bradley, worried he'd think I didn't trust him, or that I was more focused on money than love. But Bradley's reaction surprised me. He laughed and waved it off like it was nothing. Of course, darling. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for you. He signed the papers without even reading them, joking that love doesn't need fine print. His casual attitude convinced me that my worries were unfounded. It's just a romantic formality, he'd said, scribbling his signature with a flourish, like promising to love, honor, and cherish, but with more legal jargon. I remembered feeling relieved that he was so understanding, so willing to put my concerns at ease. Patricia had been thorough in crafting the agreement, protecting not just my existing assets but any future inheritance or business growth. Your grandmother's estate will eventually come to you, she'd reminded me. This ensures it stays in your family where it belongs. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now I realized she'd been absolutely prescient. The real shock came 18 months into our marriage when I received the call about my grandmother's estate. She'd left me everything. Her house, her investments, her collection of rare books, and $2.8 million in carefully managed funds. It was far more than I'd ever expected, and the inheritance transformed my financial situation overnight. Bradley's reaction to the news had been telling, though I'd missed the significance at the time. His eyes had literally lit up when I told him about the money. $2.8 million, he'd repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Judith, we're rich. The way he said "we're" should have been my first clue. From that moment forward, Bradley's spending habits changed dramatically. He quit his job within 6 months, claiming he wanted to explore new opportunities and be there to support my success. What he actually did was spend my money like it was his own personal allowance. He bought a luxury car, supposedly for networking purposes. He invested in a friend's restaurant without consulting me, losing $30,000 when the business failed within a year. He booked expensive vacations, joined an exclusive golf club, and started dressing like he'd always been wealthy. Every time I questioned a purchase, he'd remind me that we're partners and that couples should trust each other with financial decisions. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I discovered Bradley had been telling people at the country club that the inheritance was family money that belonged to both of us. He'd started introducing himself as an investor and entrepreneur, conveniently forgetting to mention that all his investments were made with my grandmother's carefully preserved wealth. When I confronted him about his lies and his spending, Bradley became defensive and then cruel. You act like it's some big secret that I married up, he'd snapped. Everyone knows you needed someone like me to enjoy life. Before we met, you were just a lonely workaholic with no social life. His words cut deep because there was a grain of truth in them. I had been lonely, and Bradley had brought excitement and companionship into my life. But I realized he'd been playing a long game, positioning himself as my savior, while systematically planning to claim everything I'd inherited. The final straw came when I found emails between Bradley and his attorney discussing divorce strategy. They'd been planning this for months, timing it to maximize his potential settlement. Bradley had even researched Tennessee's divorce laws, looking for ways to claim that his emotional support and lifestyle contributions entitled him to a larger share of my assets. That's when I'd finally contacted Patricia again and filed for divorce myself. I refused to let Bradley control the narrative or the timeline. If he wanted a fight over my grandmother's money, I'd give him one, but it wouldn't go the way he expected. Now, standing in this courtroom, I was ready to show Bradley and everyone else exactly what his greed had earned him. I reached into my purse and withdrew the manila envelope that Patricia had prepared for this exact moment. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the air conditioning system. Bradley's confident expression faltered slightly as he watched me approach the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear. I believe the court needs to review this document before proceeding with any asset division discussions. Judge Richardson extended her hand and accepted the envelope. What is the nature of this document, Mrs. Crawford? It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, one that my husband signed before our marriage 5 years ago. The change in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate and electric. Bradley's attorney, a thin man named Gerald Weston, shot up from his chair like he'd been stung. Your Honor, we were not made aware of any prenuptial agreement. This is highly irregular. Sit down, Mr. Weston, Judge Richardson commanded, already breaking the seal on the envelope. I'll examine the documents and determine their validity. I returned to my seat, keeping my eyes focused on Bradley. His face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic in the span of 30 seconds. He was whispering frantically to his attorney, gesturing toward the judge's bench. I could make out fragments of his urgent words. She never mentioned. And how is this possible? Patricia Holbrook, my attorney, remained perfectly calm beside me. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, ensuring every detail of our strategy was foolproof. Just watch, she whispered to me with a small smile. Judge Richardson was a thorough reader, taking her time with each page of the agreement. The document was comprehensive. Patricia had made sure of that 5 years ago. It outlined exactly which assets were protected, which debts would remain separate, and most importantly, how any future inheritance would be handled. This appears to be a properly executed prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson announced, after several minutes of careful review. It's dated 6 weeks before your marriage, witnessed by 2 notaries, and signed by both parties. Bradley's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I realized that Gerald Weston had filed this divorce case without doing basic due diligence. He'd assumed, just like Bradley, that the marriage was a straightforward asset grab. Your Honor? Bradley suddenly stood up, his voice cracking slightly. I need to see that document. I don't remember signing anything like that. The judge's eyebrows rose at Bradley's outburst. Mr. Crawford, please remain seated and allow your attorney to handle these proceedings. But Bradley was spiraling now, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling. Judith, what is this? You never told me this was some kind of legal trap. Mr. Crawford. Judge Richardson's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. You will remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Your attorney may request to review the document through proper channels. Gerald Weston approached the bench with obvious reluctance. I watched him examine the prenuptial agreement, his face growing paler with each page. He returned to his table and began whispering urgently to Bradley, who was shaking his head in disbelief. The courtroom spectators were now fully engaged, sensing that something dramatic was unfolding. I could hear muffled conversations and the scratching of reporters' pens as they tried to capture every detail of Bradley's public humiliation. Your Honor, Gerald finally addressed the court, his voice notably lacking its earlier confidence. My client would like to request a brief recess to review these documents more thoroughly. Judge Richardson checked her watch. Mr. Weston, did you not conduct discovery regarding potential prenuptial agreements before filing your asset claims? The attorney's silence was answer enough. Bradley had been so confident in his strategy that he'd never even mentioned the possibility of a prenup to his lawyer. Gerald Weston had been blindsided just as much as his client. I'll give you 10 minutes to review the document, Judge Richardson declared, but I should warn you that this appears to be a legally binding agreement that significantly impacts your client's claims. During the recess, I watched Bradley and his attorney huddled in intense conversation near the courtroom windows. Bradley's gestures were becoming more animated and desperate as Gerald explained the implications of the prenuptial agreement. Even from across the room, I could see the exact moment when Bradley realized his plan had completely backfired. Patricia used the time to review her own notes and prepare for what she knew would be Bradley's last-ditch attempts to challenge the agreement. He's going to claim fraud or duress, she predicted quietly. Men like Bradley always blame everyone else when their schemes fall apart. She was right. When court resumed, Gerald Weston immediately launched into a desperate legal argument. Your Honor, my client believes he was deceived about the nature of this document. Mrs. Crawford presented it as a romantic formality, not a comprehensive asset protection agreement. Judge Richardson looked distinctly unimpressed. Mr. Weston, are you claiming your client signed a legal document without reading it? Your Honor, my client trusted his wife-to-be. He believed she was being honest about the document's scope and implications. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Bradley had always prided himself on being a shrewd businessman, someone who could read people and situations. Now his attorney was arguing that he was too trusting and naive to understand a legal contract. The document is clearly labeled as a prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson observed, flipping through the pages. It includes standard warnings about seeking independent legal counsel. Did your client choose to waive that right? Gerald shuffled through his papers nervously. Yes, Your Honor. My client waived his right to independent counsel. And the document was reviewed by a notary public, correct? With your client present and confirming his identity? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Richardson turned her attention directly to Bradley. Mr. Crawford, when you signed this document, did anyone force you to do so? Were you under any kind of duress or coercion? Bradley's face was red with embarrassment and anger. No, Your Honor, but I thought it was just paperwork. Judith made it sound like it didn't matter. Did you read the document before signing it? The question hung in the air like a sword. Bradley looked around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable for everyone present. Mr. Crawford, I asked you a direct question. I skimmed it, Bradley finally admitted. But Judith said it was just a formality. Judge Richardson's expression was a masterpiece of judicial disapproval. Mr. Crawford, you signed a legal document without reading it, after waiving your right to legal counsel, and now you're asking this court to invalidate it because you didn't take it seriously. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing, mesmerized by Bradley's public humiliation. I felt a surge of satisfaction watching him squirm under the judge's scrutiny. Your Honor, Gerald made one final attempt. Perhaps we could argue that the agreement is unconscionable given the disparity in... Mr. Weston, Judge Richardson interrupted. Have you reviewed the financial disclosures included with this prenuptial agreement? Gerald flipped through the document again, clearly searching for something he'd missed. There are extensive financial disclosures here, Your Honor. Indeed there are. Mrs. Crawford provided complete documentation of her assets, income, and expected inheritance. Your client signed acknowledgments confirming he reviewed and understood all financial information. This is one of the most thorough prenuptial agreements I've seen in my 23 years on the bench. Bradley looked like he was about to be sick. The golden boy who had charmed his way through life was finally facing consequences for his actions. Judge Richardson cleared her throat and began reading directly from the prenuptial agreement, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Section 4, Paragraph A. All assets owned by either party prior to marriage shall remain the separate property of that party. Section 4, Paragraph B. Any inheritance received by either party during the marriage shall be considered separate property and shall not be subject to division upon divorce. Bradley's face went through a spectrum of colors, red to white to green. He gripped the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were white. That can't be legal, he muttered, loud enough for several people to hear. Section 6, Judge Richardson continued, addresses spousal support. Quote, neither party shall be entitled to alimony or spousal support from the other, regardless of the length of the marriage or the disparity in income. The judge looked up from the document. This section was initialed by both parties and witnessed separately. Gerald Weston was frantically taking notes, probably trying to find any possible loophole or technicality. But Patricia had been too thorough 5 years ago. Every potential challenge had been anticipated and addressed. Your Honor, I stood up. If I may address the court. Proceed, Mrs. Crawford. When I inherited my grandmother's estate 18 months ago, I consulted with my attorney about whether the inheritance was protected under the prenuptial agreement. We confirmed that it was fully covered under Section 4, Paragraph B. The inheritance has been kept in separate accounts and has never been commingled with marital assets. This was the final nail in Bradley's coffin. Not only was the prenup ironclad, but I'd been scrupulously careful about keeping the inheritance separate. There was no way for him to claim any portion of it. Judge Richardson nodded approvingly. Mrs. Crawford, did you use any portion of your inheritance for marital expenses or joint purchases? No, Your Honor. I maintained my regular income for household expenses. The inheritance has remained completely separate. Bradley exploded. That's not true. She bought things for us. She paid for vacations. Mr. Crawford, Judge Richardson's voice was ice cold. You are out of order. Sit down immediately. But Bradley was beyond reason now. His carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. This is insane. I've been with her for 5 years. I supported her emotionally. I gave up my career. You quit your job to spend my money, I said quietly, unable to help myself. Mrs. Crawford, Judge Richardson warned, but her tone was almost amused. Gerald was tugging on Bradley's jacket, trying to get him to sit down and stop making things worse. But Bradley was in full meltdown mode, his true nature finally showing through. She trapped me, Bradley shouted. She made me think we were partners. She let me believe that money was ours. Mr. Crawford, if you cannot control yourself, I will have the bailiff remove you from my courtroom. The threat of being physically removed finally penetrated Bradley's rage. He sat down heavily, his chest heaving with angry breaths. But the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had seen his true character. The greedy, entitled man who had married me for my money, and then had the audacity to act like a victim when his plan failed. Judge Richardson reviewed the final pages of the prenuptial agreement with deliberate care. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for her ruling. I felt a calm satisfaction settling over me. After months of Bradley's manipulation and lies, the truth was finally coming to light. Based on my review of this prenuptial agreement, Judge Richardson announced, I am ready to render my decision on asset division. Judge Richardson removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Bradley with an expression that could have frozen fire. Mr. Crawford, this prenuptial agreement is valid, comprehensive, and legally binding. You are entitled to exactly nothing from your wife's premarital assets, inheritance, or business holdings. The words hit Bradley like physical blows. His mouth fell open, and he stared at the judge in complete disbelief. Nothing, he whispered. Nothing, Judge Richardson confirmed. Furthermore, according to Section 7 of this agreement, all debts incurred individually by either party remain the responsibility of that party. Mrs. Crawford, do you have documentation of debts incurred solely by your husband? Patricia handed me a thick folder, which I passed to the bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Credit card debts, the car loan, the failed restaurant investment, and country club fees totaling approximately $87,000. Bradley's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The case he'd thought would net him a substantial fee had turned into a complete disaster. Mr. Crawford, Judge Richardson continued, not only will you receive no assets from this marriage, but you remain personally responsible for $87,000 in debt that you accumulated during the marriage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. I could hear someone behind me stifle a laugh. Bradley had gone from expecting millions to facing bankruptcy in the span of 30 minutes. Your Honor, Bradley's voice was barely audible. This can't be right. 5 years of marriage has to count for something. Judge Richardson's smile was razor sharp. It does count for something, Mr. Crawford. It counts as an expensive lesson in reading legal documents before signing them. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. The court grants the divorce petition filed by Mrs. Crawford. No assets shall be transferred to Mr. Crawford. All individual debts remain with the party who incurred them. This court is adjourned. Bradley sat in stunned silence as the reality of his situation sank in. He'd spent 5 years positioning himself for this moment, only to discover that his plan had been doomed from the day he casually signed the prenuptial agreement without reading it. People began filing out of the courtroom, but I remained seated, watching Bradley's world collapse around him. Gerald Weston was already packing his briefcase, clearly eager to escape this professional embarrassment. Several reporters approached me for comment, but Patricia intercepted them with practiced efficiency. "Judith," Bradley called out, as I finally stood to leave. "We need to talk about this. This isn't over." I turned to face him one last time. "Bradley, it was over the moment you decided to marry me for my money instead of loving me for who I am. The prenuptial agreement didn't ruin your plan. Your greed did." His face crumpled as the full weight of his situation hit him. No inheritance, no assets, and crushing debt that would follow him for years. The man who had charmed his way through life had finally met a situation that couldn't be smooth-talked or manipulated away. As I walked toward the courtroom doors with Patricia beside me, I felt lighter than I had in months. The nightmare was finally over, and Bradley's true nature had been exposed for everyone to see. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came with its own sense of poetic irony. Bradley's life unraveled completely in the months following our divorce. The $87,000 in debt forced him into bankruptcy within 6 months, destroying his credit and making it impossible for him to maintain his lifestyle. His reputation in Nashville's business community was ruined when word spread about how he'd tried to steal his wife's inheritance, making him a cautionary tale about prenuptial agreements and the dangers of marrying for money. The country club revoked his membership when he couldn't pay his dues, and the luxury car was repossessed, leaving him dependent on public transportation. His dating life became non-existent as women in our social circles learned about his gold-digging scheme, warning each other about the charming man who viewed marriage as a business transaction. He was forced to move in with his elderly parents in Memphis and take an entry-level sales job, his dreams of living off my grandmother's money replaced by the harsh reality of starting over at 47 with nothing but debt and a damaged reputation. I used a portion of my protected inheritance to establish the Crawford Foundation, which provides legal assistance to women seeking prenuptial agreements and divorce representation, ensuring that other women wouldn't fall victim to financial predators like Bradley. Looking back on my journey from trusting wife to empowered divorcee, I realized that my grandmother's wisdom about protecting family wealth had saved me from more than just financial loss. It had saved me from a lifetime of being used by someone who saw my love as nothing more than a pathway to easy money. "They're putting you in a nursing home and taking your savings today, Grandma Elaine." Those innocent words from my 8-year-old granddaughter Sophie made my blood run cold as I stood in my kitchen in Birmingham, Alabama, stirring a pot of vegetable soup. I nearly dropped the wooden spoon as the weight of her statement hit me like a physical blow. My name is Elaine Patterson, and at 69 years old I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. Standing there in the home I had lived in for 43 years, watching Sophie color at my kitchen table while her parents were out running errands, I realized that my own son Benjamin and his wife Victoria had been plotting against me with surgical precision. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as my heart hammered against my ribs. Sophie looked up from her coloring book, her crayon still moving across the paper as if she were discussing the weather. "Mommy and Daddy were talking about it last night. They said you're getting too old to live by yourself, and they need to take care of your money so bad people don't steal it." She paused, selecting a purple crayon. "Daddy said something about papers and a judge, and Mommy was really excited about finally getting to buy that big house she wants." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white as I processed what Sophie had just revealed. For months, Benjamin and Victoria had been expressing increasing concern about my declining mental state, despite the fact that I managed my own finances, maintained my home, and continued volunteering at the local literacy center 3 days a week. Their sudden attention to my well-being had felt suspicious, but I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. Now I understood the truth. They weren't concerned about my welfare at all. They were positioning themselves to have me declared incompetent so they could access my $1.2 million estate. The thought made my stomach churn with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. This was my son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when Benjamin was 12. I had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed my own dreams to ensure he had every opportunity. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Sophie asked, noticing my silence. I forced a smile, though inside I felt like something fundamental had shattered. "I'm fine, honey. Keep coloring." But I wasn't fine. I was furious, and more importantly, I was determined. If Benjamin and Victoria thought they could manipulate a supposedly confused old woman, they were about to discover just how sharp my mind really was. As Sophie continued coloring, my mind raced through the past 6 months, connecting dots I had previously dismissed. Benjamin's sudden interest in my memory lapses, when I occasionally misplaced my keys. Victoria's pointed comments about the burden of maintaining such a large house. Their questions about my financial advisor, my attorney, and whether I had updated my will recently. The most chilling realization was how calculated their approach had been. Benjamin worked as an insurance claims investigator, which meant he understood exactly how competency hearings worked. Victoria, a former medical office manager, knew the right medical professionals to consult for favorable evaluations. Together, they had been building a case against me while pretending to be loving family members concerned for my welfare. I thought back to last week when Benjamin had insisted on accompanying me to my doctor's appointment. At the time, I had been touched by his attention. Now I realized he had probably been trying to plant seeds of doubt about my mental capacity with Dr. Harrison. The way he had interrupted me during the consultation, finishing my sentences and suggesting I was confused about my medications, suddenly took on a sinister meaning. Victoria's behavior made sense now, too. Her recent visits had included subtle suggestions about how difficult it must be for me to manage household finances. She had offered multiple times to help me organize my paperwork, claiming she wanted to ensure all my important documents were safely stored. When I had politely declined, she had pressed harder, suggesting that keeping track of bills and investments was becoming too stressful for someone my age. The cruelest part was how they had used Sophie in their scheme. My granddaughter had been encouraged to report back about Grandma's confusion after each visit. I remembered Sophie mentioning that her parents asked detailed questions about whether I seemed to forget things or repeat myself. They had turned an innocent child into an unwitting spy against her own grandmother. What broke my heart most was understanding that their sudden family dinners and weekend visits hadn't been motivated by love or genuine concern. Every moment of closeness had been manufactured to gather intelligence for their legal case. Benjamin's recent suggestion that I sign some updated documents for my safety now revealed itself as an attempt to trick me into signing papers that would make their legal theft easier. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me completely. I hadn't built a successful consulting business and accumulated significant wealth by being naive or easily manipulated. If they wanted to play hardball with an old woman, they were about to learn that this particular grandmother had spent decades outmaneuvering people who thought they were smarter than her. The irony was that in their greed and eagerness to share their plans, they had revealed everything to the one person who would never keep their secrets, an 8-year-old child who trusted her grandmother completely. After Sophie revealed their plan, I realized I had perhaps 3 hours before Benjamin and Victoria returned, from what they had told me was a shopping trip to pick up dinner. Now I understood they were likely finalizing arrangements with the nursing home and preparing whatever legal documents they planned to ambush me with. The timeline was tight, but I had spent my career handling crisis situations under pressure. My first call was to Patricia Wong, my attorney and one of the smartest legal minds I knew. We had worked together when I sold my consulting firm 5 years ago, and she understood exactly how important my independence was to me. Patricia, I need your help immediately, I said, explaining Sophie's revelation. They're planning to have me declared incompetent, probably as early as today. Her response was swift and decisive. Elaine, we need to establish an irrevocable trust right now. How quickly can you get to my office? I can't leave. They'll be back soon, and I need to be here when they arrive with whatever paperwork they've prepared. I could hear Patricia typing rapidly on her computer. Then we'll do this over the phone and fax. I'm preparing the documents now. You'll need to transfer your major assets into a trust with Sophie as the primary beneficiary. Once it's irrevocable, Benjamin and Victoria can't touch those funds even if they somehow succeed with their competency case. My next call was to Robert Kim, my financial advisor at North Peak Engineering's investment division. We had maintained my portfolio conservatively but profitably for 15 years. Robert, I need to execute some emergency transfers today. How quickly can we move my investments into a different structure? Elaine, if this is about asset protection, we can have most of your holdings transferred within 2 hours. What exactly are we protecting against? I explained the situation, and Robert's professional calm cracked slightly. That's unconscionable. Let me start the paperwork immediately. We'll move everything into the trust structure your attorney is creating. While Sophie hummed quietly over her coloring book, I systematically dismantled my son's inheritance expectations. The house deed was transferred into the trust. My investment accounts, including the substantial holdings from my business sale, were moved beyond Benjamin and Victoria's reach. Even my checking and savings accounts were restructured so that any court order they might obtain would find nearly empty accounts. The final call was to my neighbor, Joyce Martinez, a retired social worker who understood family dynamics better than most. Joyce, I need a witness to come over in about an hour, and I might need you to take Sophie home to her parents if things get complicated. Of course, honey. What's going on? My family is about to learn that underestimating a grandmother is a very expensive mistake. As I hung up the phone, I looked at Sophie, still peacefully coloring. In 2 hours, her innocent revelation would save my independence and teach her parents that greed comes with consequences they never imagined. The documents arrived by courier at exactly 3:30 p.m., 45 minutes before Benjamin and Victoria were scheduled to return. Patricia had worked with remarkable speed, creating an ironclad irrevocable trust that removed virtually all my assets from any potential legal reach. As I signed the final papers with Joyce Martinez as my witness, I felt a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. Elaine, are you sure about this? Joyce asked, reviewing the trust documents. This is a significant step. Joyce, my son is planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can steal my money and warehouse me in a nursing home. Sophie told me their entire plan. I signed my name with steady hands. This isn't just about protecting my assets. It's about protecting my dignity and my granddaughter's future. Joyce's expression hardened. As a former social worker, she had seen elder abuse in many forms. What they're planning is criminal. Have you considered involving adult protective services? First, I want them to experience the consequences of their greed. Then we'll see what legal action is appropriate. I folded the completed trust documents and placed them in my desk drawer. For now, I want them to walk into their own trap. At 4:15 p.m., I heard Benjamin's car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him and Victoria exit the vehicle with purposeful expressions. Victoria carried a manila folder thick with documents, while Benjamin had what appeared to be a clipboard with official-looking papers. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they held all the cards. Sophie looked up from her coloring book as they entered through the front door. Mommy, Daddy, Grandma and I made cookies and I told her about your surprise. Victoria's face went pale. What surprise, sweetie? About the nursing home and taking Grandma's money. You said it was supposed to be a secret, but Grandma makes the best cookies when she's happy, so I thought she should know early. The silence in my living room was deafening. Benjamin and Victoria exchanged a look of pure panic while I smiled serenely from my armchair. Joyce, still seated at my kitchen table, observed the scene with professional interest. "Hello, Benjamin. Victoria." I kept my voice warm and grandmotherly. "Sophie tells me you have some interesting plans to discuss." Benjamin recovered first, his insurance investigator training kicking in. "Mom, we need to talk. We've been concerned about your ability to live independently, and we've found a wonderful facility where you'll receive proper care." "How thoughtful of you." I gestured to the manila folder. "Are those the commitment papers?" Victoria's composure cracked. "Elaine, you don't understand. The house is too much for you to maintain. Your finances are becoming complicated. We're trying to protect you from people who might take advantage. People like yourselves." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Benjamin set down his clipboard and attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Mother, I know this is difficult, but we've consulted with medical professionals. There are concerns about your cognitive function that need to be addressed through proper legal channels." "I see. And I suppose those proper legal channels involve having me declared incompetent so you can access my $1.2 million estate?" I watched their faces as I spoke the exact amount. "Did you think I didn't know what I was worth, Benjamin?" Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. "We're not trying to steal anything. We're trying to ensure your money is properly managed before you lose it all to confusion or scammers. The only scammers I see are standing in my living room, attempting to defraud an elderly woman with the help of falsified medical evaluations and forged documents." Benjamin's face flushed red as he realized their carefully constructed plan was unraveling. "Mom, you're being paranoid. We would never try to hurt you. This is about keeping you safe." "Safe from what exactly?" "I manage my own finances, maintain my home, volunteer regularly, and have been mentally sharp enough to see through your scheme for months." I stood up from my armchair, feeling stronger and more determined than I had in years. "The only thing I need protection from is my own family's greed." Victoria stepped forward, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "You can't just dismiss our concerns. We've spent months researching the best care options for you. We've invested time and money into finding solutions for your declining condition." "My declining condition?" I laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "Victoria, you mean the condition you and Benjamin have been fabricating? The memory lapses you've been documenting? The confusion you've been reporting to medical professionals?" Benjamin tried a different approach, his voice becoming pleading. "Mom, even if you disagree with our methods, you have to admit that managing a large estate at your age is stressful. Wouldn't it be easier to let us handle the financial responsibilities while you focus on enjoying your retirement? Enjoying my retirement in a nursing home you've selected, while you enjoy spending my money on the house Victoria has been dreaming about?" I walked to my desk and retrieved the trust documents. "I'm afraid that plan has encountered a significant obstacle." Joyce stood up from the kitchen table, ready to support me if needed. Sophie continued coloring, blissfully unaware that her innocent revelation had destroyed her parents' carefully laid plans. "What obstacle?" Victoria demanded, her composure completely shattered now. I held up the trust documents. "The obstacle of an attorney who works quickly and a grandmother who isn't nearly as confused as you hoped she would be." Benjamin snatched the papers from my hands, scanning them rapidly. His face went from red to ashen as he read. "This can't be legal. You can't just give away our inheritance." "Your inheritance?" My voice turned ice cold. "Benjamin, these assets were never yours. They were mine to do with as I chose, and I chose to protect them from children who plan to steal them through legal manipulation." Victoria grabbed the documents from Benjamin, her hands shaking as she read. "The house? The investments? Everything is gone? How is that possible?" "It's possible because while you were out making final arrangements to commit me against my will, I was making arrangements to ensure my granddaughter's future is secure from her parents' greed." I sat back down, feeling a deep satisfaction. Every asset you plan to steal is now in an irrevocable trust with Sophie as the primary beneficiary. "This is insane!" Victoria screamed, throwing the papers onto my coffee table. "You can't just disinherit your own family because of some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Joyce spoke for the first time since they had arrived. "I'm a retired social worker, and what you two planned constitutes elder abuse. There's no misunderstanding about stealing someone's independence and assets through fraudulent competency proceedings." Benjamin's professional training finally kicked in, and he realized the legal jeopardy they were facing. "Mom, we can work this out. We can find a compromise that makes everyone happy." "The time for compromise ended when you decided to treat me like an incompetent obstacle to your financial goals, rather than like your mother." Victoria's desperation reached a crescendo as the full implications of their failed scheme sank in. "You don't understand. We've already made commitments based on accessing that money. We put a down payment on a house. Benjamin quit his job because we thought we'd be managing your estate." "You quit your job?" I stared at my son in disbelief. "You were so confident in your ability to steal my assets that you quit your job before you even succeeded?" Benjamin's face crumpled as he realized how thoroughly they had miscalculated. "It wasn't stealing, Mom. It was planning for the future. We knew you'd eventually need care, and we wanted to be prepared to provide it. By having me declared mentally incompetent, by committing me to a nursing home against my will, by taking control of assets I spent 40 years building." My voice rose with each question. "Benjamin, you were 12 when your father died. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I sacrificed my own comfort to ensure you had every opportunity. And this is how you repay that sacrifice?" Sophie looked up from her coloring book, finally sensing the tension in the room. "Why is everyone yelling? Did I do something wrong by telling Grandma about the surprise?" The innocent question cut through the room like a blade. Victoria and Benjamin realized that their own daughter had exposed their plan because they had been careless enough to discuss it in front of her. Their greed had made them sloppy, and now an 8-year-old child had destroyed months of careful preparation. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You did exactly the right thing by telling Grandma the truth. Honesty is always the best choice." Benjamin made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mom, please. Let's sit down and discuss this rationally. We can undo the trust. We can find a solution that works for everyone." "The trust is irrevocable, Benjamin. Even if I wanted to undo it, which I don't, it's legally impossible. Every asset you plan to steal is now permanently beyond your reach." I picked up the commitment papers he had brought. "Were you planning to have me sign these today? Or were you going to forge my signature like I suspect you've done on other documents?" Victoria burst into tears, the weight of their financial ruin finally hitting her. "We're going to lose everything. The house deposit, Benjamin's job, our credit rating. How are we supposed to explain this to Sophie?" "Perhaps you should explain it the same way you explained your plan to steal from her grandmother," Joyce suggested coldly. "Children deserve honesty about their parents' character." I stood up and walked to my front door, opening it wide. "I think it's time for you to leave. Sophie can stay here tonight if she wants, or Joyce can drive her home when you've had time to process this situation." Benjamin gathered up the useless commitment papers, his hands shaking. "This isn't over, Mom. We can challenge the trust. We can prove you were coerced or confused when you signed it. By all means, challenge it. Patricia Wong would love to depose you both about your plan to commit fraud against an elderly family member. I'm sure that legal discovery process will be fascinating for everyone involved." I maintained my position by the open door. "You have 30 seconds to leave my property before I call the police to report an attempted elder abuse scheme." They left without another word. Victoria still crying, and Benjamin staring straight ahead with the expression of a man who had just watched his future crumble. As their car pulled away, Sophie looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, are Mommy and Daddy in trouble?" "Yes, sweetheart, but sometimes people have to face consequences when they make very bad choices." The next morning brought a series of frantic phone calls that I let go to voicemail. Benjamin's voice grew increasingly desperate with each message, while Victoria's calls devolved into angry demands that I fix this mess immediately. By noon, they appeared at my door again, this time with a different strategy. "Mom, we've spoken with our attorney," Benjamin announced, his voice artificially calm. "He believes the trust can be challenged on grounds of undue influence. Patricia Wong clearly took advantage of your emotional state." I invited them in with a smile. "How interesting. And what does your attorney think about your plan to have me declared incompetent through falsified medical evaluations?" Victoria's composure was already cracking. "We never falsified anything. We had legitimate concerns about your mental state. Concerns you documented by coaching Sophie to report my supposed confusion. Concerns you supported by interrupting my doctor's appointments to suggest I was becoming incompetent." I pulled out a folder I had prepared overnight. "Fortunately, I've been documenting your behavior as well." Benjamin's face went pale as I showed them photographs of documents they had left behind during previous visits, recordings of conversations where they discussed my supposed declining condition, and a detailed timeline of their activities over the past 6 months. "Patricia helped me compile quite an impressive case for attempted elder fraud," I continued. "We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges, not just civil litigation." "You recorded us!" Victoria screamed. "That's illegal." "Not when it's done to protect myself from family members planning to commit crimes against me. Alabama law is very clear about self-defense recordings in cases of suspected elder abuse." Benjamin realized they were completely outmaneuvered. "What do you want from us, Mom?" "I want you to understand that your greed has cost you everything. Sophie's college fund is secure, but your inheritance is gone forever. Your attempt to steal from me has backfired spectacularly." The beautiful irony was that their scheme had been so elaborate, so calculated, that it provided perfect evidence of their criminal intent. Joyce arrived just as Benjamin and Victoria were preparing to leave, bringing with her a representative from Adult Protective Services and a detective who specialized in elder fraud cases. The timing was perfect, though I had not orchestrated their arrival. "Mrs. Patterson," Detective Williams introduced himself, "we received a report about a potential elder abuse case involving attempted financial exploitation." Victoria's face went from red to white in seconds. "This is harassment. We were trying to help Elaine." "By having her declared incompetent so you could access her assets?" Detective Williams consulted his notes. "We've reviewed the evidence Mrs. Patterson provided, including recordings of conversations where you discussed your plan to commit her against her will." Benjamin tried to assert some control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. "We haven't broken any laws. We were concerned about our mother's welfare and explored legal options for ensuring her care. Legal options that included falsifying reports about her mental condition and attempting to trick her into signing documents that would facilitate your access to her assets." The Adult Protective Services representative spoke up. "Mr. Patterson, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person is a felony in Alabama." I watched my son's face as he realized that their carefully planned scheme had not only failed, but had exposed them to serious criminal liability. Victoria began crying again, understanding that their financial ruin was now compounded by potential jail time. "The irony," I said quietly, "is that if you had simply been honest about your financial problems, I might have been willing to help. Instead, your greed has cost you everything, including your relationship with Sophie and your standing in this family." Detective Williams handed Benjamin a card. "You'll want to contact an attorney. We'll be filing charges by the end of the week." As they were escorted out, I felt a profound sense of justice served and protection secured. Benjamin and Victoria faced devastating consequences that extended far beyond their failed inheritance grab. The criminal charges for attempted elder fraud resulted in felony convictions that destroyed Benjamin's career in insurance and made Victoria unemployable in any position requiring financial trust, while their early withdrawal from Benjamin's retirement accounts to fund their premature house purchase created massive tax penalties they couldn't afford to pay. Their marriage crumbled under the financial pressure and mutual blame, leading to a bitter divorce where Sophie chose to live primarily with me rather than with parents who had proven themselves willing to exploit family members for money. The social stigma of their attempted elder abuse scheme made them pariahs in our community, where word spread quickly about the couple who had tried to steal their own mother's independence and assets through fraudulent legal manipulation. As I tucked Sophie into bed in what was now her permanent room in my house, I reflected on how their greed had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: full custody of my granddaughter and the chance to raise her with values they had clearly never learned. Looking back on my journey from potential victim to victorious grandmother, I realized that sometimes the most important inheritance we can leave is not money, but the lesson that wisdom, preparation, and strategic thinking will always triumph over greed, and the foolish assumption that age equals vulnerability. "You cannot seriously expect us to cook our own Thanksgiving dinner," my brother Kenneth shouted into the phone, his voice echoing through my quiet apartment in Portland, Oregon. I held the receiver away from my ear as his wife Patricia grabbed it from him. "Juliana, this is ridiculous. The whole family is counting on you. Grandmother Florence is coming all the way from Salem, and Uncle Vincent is bringing his new girlfriend. You can't just abandon us 3 days before Thanksgiving." I took a deep breath, looking around my peaceful kitchen, a space that for once wasn't covered in flour and turkey drippings during the holiday season. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply choosing not to spend my Thanksgiving slaving away in a kitchen while everyone else enjoys themselves. My name is Juliana Hayes, and I'm 42 years old. For nearly 20 years, I've been the unofficial and unpaid holiday chef for my entire extended family. While everyone else gathered in the living room, sharing stories and taking photos by the fireplace, I stood alone in the kitchen, preparing elaborate feasts for 15 to 20 people. This year, I decided enough was enough. The tradition started innocently when I was 23 and had just graduated from culinary school. My parents, Robert and Diana, had always struggled with cooking, so I offered to help with Christmas dinner. What began as a generous gesture slowly morphed into an expectation, then a demand. Every holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, even 4th of July barbecues, became my responsibility. "But who's going to make the herb-crusted turkey with the rosemary gravy?" Patricia continued, her voice reaching a pitch that could shatter wine glasses. "And what about your famous sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping? Uncle Vincent specifically requested it." I almost laughed. Uncle Vincent couldn't even remember my middle name, but he certainly remembered my sweet potato casserole. "Patricia, perhaps this is the perfect opportunity for you to learn some new skills in the kitchen. I have complete faith in your abilities." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Neither Kenneth nor Patricia had ever prepared anything more complex than microwave popcorn for a family gathering. They had become so accustomed to my cooking that they genuinely believed they were incapable of preparing a holiday meal themselves. "This is completely selfish, Juliana," Kenneth said, taking the phone back. "Family comes first. You know how much these gatherings mean to Mom and Dad." His words stung because they held a grain of truth twisted into manipulation. These gatherings did mean everything to our parents, but only because they received all the credit for hosting while I did all the work. They basked in compliments about the wonderful meal while I scrubbed dishes until midnight, my feet aching and my back screaming from standing for 12 hours straight. Family does come first, Kenneth. That's exactly why I'm making this decision. Growing up, our family wasn't particularly close, but holidays had always been important to my parents. My father Robert worked as a manager at Creswell Electric, and my mother Diana taught elementary school. They prided themselves on maintaining family traditions, even though neither possessed any real cooking skills. Their idea of a home-cooked meal was frozen dinners heated in the oven. When I showed interest in cooking during high school, they encouraged it as a useful hobby. After I graduated from culinary school and started working as a pastry chef at North Peak Engineering's corporate cafeteria, they began hinting that I should contribute more to family gatherings. The first time I agreed to cook Thanksgiving dinner, my parents were thrilled. The praise was intoxicating. Relatives raved about the perfectly golden turkey, the silky, smooth mashed potatoes, the flaky buttermilk biscuits that practically melted in their mouths. But somewhere along the way, appreciation transformed into expectation. My parents stopped asking if I would cook and started telling people what I would be preparing. "Juliana's making her famous apple cider glazed ham this Easter," my mother would announce at church, as if it were already decided. "She has such a gift." The gift, apparently, came with invisible chains. Kenneth, 3 years older than me, had married Patricia 5 years ago. She was a marketing coordinator who considered herself quite sophisticated, often mentioning her college sorority days and her extensive knowledge of wine pairings. However, her culinary expertise extended only to making reservations at trendy restaurants. Kenneth worked in sales and spent most family gatherings discussing his latest commission checks and showing off photos from his recent vacation to Hawaii. My sister Patricia, yes, I had a sister-in-law and a sister with the same name, which created endless confusion at family events, was 2 years younger than me and worked as a dental hygienist. She had never shown any interest in cooking and seemed genuinely baffled by the concept of following a recipe. She would wander into the kitchen during my marathon cooking sessions, taste something, and offer unhelpful commentary like, needs more flavor, before disappearing back to the party. The breaking point came last Christmas, when I spent 18 hours preparing a feast for 22 people. I had started cooking at dawn, preparing homemade dinner rolls, a herb-crusted prime rib, roasted vegetables with balsamic glaze, 3 different desserts, and countless side dishes. While I worked, I could hear laughter and conversation from the living room, the clink of champagne glasses, and the camera clicks as everyone posed for family photos. When dinner was finally served, Uncle Vincent stood up to make a toast. "To Robert and Diana," he said, raising his glass, "for always hosting such magnificent holiday celebrations. You two really know how to bring the family together." I stood in the kitchen doorway, my apron stained with gravy and my hands raw from washing dishes, watching my parents accept praise for my work. That's when I realized I wasn't a family member at these gatherings. I was unpaid kitchen staff. Nobody noticed when I quietly slipped out the back door and drove home alone, leaving behind a kitchen full of dirty dishes and serving platters. The months following that Christmas revelation were eye-opening. I began paying attention to how my family interacted with me outside of holidays. Kenneth called me exactly twice, once to ask if I had a good recipe for chicken parmesan, because Patricia wanted to impress her book club, and once to inform me that they had volunteered me to cater their neighbor's birthday party. He seemed genuinely confused when I declined. My parents contacted me primarily to discuss upcoming holiday menus. My mother would call in early October to discuss Thanksgiving preparations, always phrasing her requests as questions while making it clear that no wasn't an acceptable answer. "You'll do your usual turkey with all the fixings, won't you, sweetheart? Everyone looks forward to it so much." I started keeping track of the financial cost of these holiday extravaganzas. Last Thanksgiving alone, I had spent nearly $800 on ingredients: organic turkey, fresh herbs, imported cheeses, premium wines for cooking, specialty fruits for the cranberry sauce. Not once had anyone offered to contribute financially. When I mentioned the cost to my father, he had laughed and said, "Well, you do eat the food too, Juliana. Consider it your contribution to the family." The emotional cost was even higher. I missed conversations with relatives I rarely saw, inside jokes that developed while I was trapped in the kitchen, and photo opportunities that captured family memories. I became the invisible engine that made holiday magic possible, while remaining excluded from the magic itself. My turning point came in early November, when my friend Beverly invited me to her family's Thanksgiving. Beverly was a fellow chef who understood the labor of love that went into holiday cooking. At her house, everyone contributed. Some brought side dishes, others helped with preparation, and the cooking was shared among several family members. I watched in amazement as Beverly's teenage daughter helped mash potatoes while her brother-in-law carved the turkey. The kitchen was full of laughter and conversation, not solitary labor. "This is what holiday cooking should feel like," Beverly told me as we worked side by side, preparing stuffing. "It's about bringing people together, not separating one person from the group." That evening, I made my decision. I would not be cooking Thanksgiving dinner this year. I would not be spending Christmas Day in isolation, preparing meals for people who saw me as a service provider rather than a family member. When I called my parents to inform them of my decision, my mother's first response wasn't concern for my well-being or curiosity about my reasons. It was panic about the menu. "But what will we serve? I don't know how to cook a turkey. We'll have to cancel Thanksgiving entirely." The fact that canceling Thanksgiving seemed more reasonable to her than learning to cook a turkey told me everything I needed to know about my role in this family. I was not irreplaceable as a person. I was irreplaceable as unpaid labor. As I hung up the phone after Kenneth's demanding call, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the approaching holidays. The phone calls began intensifying as Thanksgiving approached. My parents tried guilt, manipulation, and outright begging. My mother left tearful voicemails about family traditions and how disappointed everyone would be. My father took a more practical approach, offering to reimburse me for groceries, a gesture that came about 18 years too late. "Juliana, I think there's been a misunderstanding," my mother said during one particularly desperate call. "We never expected you to cook alone. We just assumed you preferred it that way since you're so talented." The absurdity of this statement almost made me laugh. "Mom, in 20 years, has anyone ever offered to help me prepare holiday meals?" A long pause. "Well, we always offered to help with cleanup. Offering to scrape plates while I hand-wash crystal glasses and serving platters isn't exactly sharing the workload." Kenneth tried a different strategy, appearing at my apartment unannounced on the Sunday before Thanksgiving. He looked genuinely distressed, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his expensive suit wrinkled. "Juliana, you have to understand the position you're putting us in," he said, pacing my living room. "I've already told my in-laws about your famous sweet potato casserole. Patricia's mother specifically asked about your cranberry orange sauce. How do I explain that you've decided to abandon the family? You could start by explaining that I haven't abandoned anyone. I've simply chosen to spend the holiday with people who appreciate my company rather than my cooking services." "That's not fair. We appreciate you." "When was the last time you and I had a conversation that didn't involve food preparation?" Kenneth opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. His expression shifted from indignation to confusion, as if he were genuinely trying to remember a non-food-related conversation and coming up empty. "See?" I said gently. "You view me as the family cook, not as your sister who happens to cook." Wednesday afternoon brought the most dramatic plea yet. My entire family, parents, Kenneth, Patricia, and my sister Patricia, showed up at my apartment building. I watched from my window as they stood on the sidewalk, looking up at my unit like carolers preparing to sing. My mother was holding a grocery bag, which she thrust at me when I finally answered the door. "We brought ingredients," she announced triumphantly. "If you're worried about the cost, we've taken care of it." I peered into the bag and had to suppress a laugh. They had purchased a frozen turkey, boxed stuffing mix, instant mashed potatoes, and canned cranberry sauce. The total cost couldn't have exceeded $30, a far cry from the hundreds I typically spent on fresh organic ingredients. "Mom, this is enough food for maybe 6 people. You're expecting 20. Well, we thought you could supplement it with some of your magic," she said hopefully. "My magic," I repeated slowly. "You mean my culinary training, my experience, my time, and my money?" Patricia, my sister-in-law, stepped forward. "Juliana, I think you're being a bit dramatic. It's just one day of cooking. How hard can it be?" This was the moment I realized they truly didn't understand what went into their holiday meals. They saw the final result: perfectly plated dishes appearing on schedule. But they had no comprehension of the planning, shopping, preparation, and execution required. You're absolutely right, Patricia. It's just one day of cooking. I'm sure you'll manage beautifully. Thursday morning, I woke up in my quiet apartment and made myself a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and coffee. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't setting my alarm for 5 a.m. to begin turkey preparation. Instead, I spent the morning reading a novel and taking a leisurely bath. At noon, I drove to Beverly's house, where her extended family was gathering for their collaborative Thanksgiving feast. I brought a bottle of wine and my famous apple tart, not because it was expected, but because I wanted to contribute to a celebration that valued my presence as much as my cooking. As I sat around Beverly's table, engaging in actual conversation and enjoying food I hadn't spent the entire day preparing alone, my phone began buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from my family. The first text arrived at 1:30 p.m. from Kenneth. The turkey isn't defrosting fast enough. How long did you usually defrost it? I deleted the message without responding. At 2:15 p.m., Patricia, my sister, called. Juliana, the oven temperature isn't making sense. The turkey package says 350 degrees. But shouldn't it be higher? Also, we can't figure out how to make the stuffing not mushy. I let it go to voicemail. By 3 p.m., the messages were arriving every few minutes. Photos of a still frozen turkey. Panicked texts about side dish timing. A voice message from my father asking if I knew where my mother kept the good cooking thermometer, because the turkey looked kind of pink still. Beverly noticed my phone buzzing constantly. Family emergency? She asked with concern. Family education, I replied, turning my phone to silent. At Beverly's table, I was having the most relaxing Thanksgiving in years. Her family included me in conversations about travel, books, and current events. Nobody asked me about recipes or kitchen techniques. I was simply Juliana, the interesting woman who worked in culinary arts, not Juliana, the holiday meal production machine. When Beverly's nephew asked about my job, I found myself describing the creative aspects of menu development and the satisfaction of teaching cooking classes. I realized I hadn't talked about the intellectual and artistic sides of my career in years. My family only saw me as a source of holiday labor, not as a professional with expertise and passion. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Beaverton, my family was discovering what Thanksgiving preparation actually entailed. Based on the messages I wasn't reading, their carefully orchestrated holiday was collapsing into chaos. At 4 p.m., I received a call from Uncle Vincent. Juliana, your mother is crying in the kitchen. Something about the turkey being raw and the potatoes being lumpy. Patricia, your sister, burned the green bean casserole. Your brother is on the phone trying to find a restaurant that's still open. Can you please come help us? Uncle Vincent, I'm spending Thanksgiving with friends who appreciate my company. I hope you all figure out a solution that works for everyone. But we don't know how to cook. You were supposed to handle the food. There it was. The truth they'd been dancing around for months. I wasn't invited to family gatherings as a loved relative. I was expected to handle the food while they enjoyed themselves. Uncle Vincent, there are literally thousands of cooking tutorials online. I have complete confidence in the family's ability to figure it out. At 5:30 p.m., I got a text from my mother with a photo of what appeared to be a very sad, very raw turkey surrounded by various failed side dishes. The caption read, "Please come help us. The family is hungry and nothing is working." I showed the photo to Beverly, who winced sympathetically. That's definitely not ready to eat. Are you sure you don't want to go help them? I've helped them for 20 years, I said. If they'd paid attention during any of those years, they'd know how to handle this. The final message of the day came at 7 p.m. from Kenneth. We ordered pizza. Everyone went home early. Thanks for ruining Thanksgiving, Juliana. Mom and Dad are devastated. I stared at that message for a long time. The accusation that I had ruined Thanksgiving by declining to work for free was exactly the kind of manipulation I expected. They couldn't conceive that their own lack of preparation and unrealistic expectations had created the disaster. That evening, as I helped Beverly's family clean up from a meal we had all prepared and enjoyed together, I felt lighter than I had in years. This was what holidays were supposed to feel like: shared celebration, not solitary labor. The aftermath of Thanksgiving was swift and illuminating. My mother called Friday morning, her voice hoarse from what I assumed was a night of crying. "Juliana, I need you to understand how humiliated we were yesterday. Uncle Vincent's girlfriend had heard so much about our wonderful holiday meals, and instead she saw us serving pizza from boxes. Grandmother Florence kept asking where you were, and we had to explain that you'd abandoned the family." "Mom, I didn't abandon anyone. I chose to spend the holiday with people who value me as a person, not as unpaid kitchen staff. That's not how we see you. Then why, in 20 years, has no one ever learned to cook a basic holiday meal? Why has no one ever offered to take over hosting duties? Why do you call my cooking contributions helping out when I literally do everything?" Silence. "I think we need to talk about Christmas," my mother said finally, her tone shifting to negotiation mode. "Maybe we could hire a caterer this year, and you could just come as a guest." The fact that hiring strangers seemed more reasonable than learning to cook themselves spoke volumes about how they viewed my past contributions. 20 years of my labor had been so completely taken for granted that they'd rather pay professionals than develop basic life skills. "Mom, I've already made Christmas plans. I'm spending the holiday with Beverly's family again." The phone call ended abruptly. Over the weekend, I heard through mutual friends that my family's Thanksgiving disaster had become neighborhood gossip. Apparently, the pizza delivery driver had arrived to find 20 confused adults standing around a raw turkey, and the story had spread quickly through their social circle. Kenneth's wife, Patricia, my sister-in-law, called on Sunday with a new strategy. "Juliana, I want to apologize for how we've taken your cooking for granted. I never realized how much work went into those meals. Would you consider teaching me some basic techniques before Christmas?" This was the first acknowledgement I'd received that my holiday contributions required skill and effort. It was also the first time anyone had expressed interest in learning, rather than simply expecting me to provide. "Patricia, I appreciate the apology, but I think this is something the whole family needs to work through together. I can't be your only backup plan for holiday hosting. What if we all took cooking classes? As a family?" The image of my entire family in matching aprons, learning knife skills together, was almost amusing enough to make me reconsider. Almost. "I think that's a wonderful idea for all of you. I hope you follow through with it." December passed peacefully. I worked on developing new recipes for the spring menu at North Peak Engineering and took a weekend trip to the coast with Beverly. For the first time in years, I approached Christmas without dread. No extensive shopping lists, no marathon cooking sessions, no aching feet and raw hands. My family made several more attempts to guilt me into resuming my holiday duties. They sent cards emphasizing how much I was missed. Though notably, these cards focused on missing my special touch in the kitchen, rather than missing my presence or conversation. On December 20th, my sister Patricia called with their final offer. "What if we paid you to cater Christmas dinner? We could hire you professionally." The fact that they would rather pay me as hired help than include me as an equal family member was the final confirmation I needed. I wasn't a daughter and sister who cooked. I was a cook who happened to be related to them. "Patricia, I'm not available for catering jobs during the holidays. I'm spending Christmas with my chosen family." Christmas morning arrived with unprecedented tranquility. I woke naturally around 8 a.m. instead of being jolted awake by pre-dawn alarms for turkey preparation. Beverly had invited me to Christmas brunch with her family, but the gathering wouldn't start until 11 a.m., a civilized hour that allowed for coffee, newspaper reading, and actual relaxation. As I sipped my coffee and watched snow fall gently outside my Portland apartment, my phone began its familiar holiday buzzing. But this time, instead of feeling obligated to respond, I felt empowered by my choice to ignore the chaos. The first call came from my mother at 9:30 a.m. "Juliana, please, we need your help. We tried to follow some online recipes, but nothing is turning out right. The ham glaze looks like soup, and the rolls are flat as pancakes. Everyone is arriving at noon expecting your usual feast." I listened to the entire voicemail, then deleted it. At 10:15 a.m., Kenneth called with barely contained panic in his voice. "Juliana, this is an emergency. Patricia, my wife, is crying because her souffle collapsed, and Sister Patricia burned the green beans again. Dad is trying to carve a ham with a butter knife because we can't find your good carving set. The kids are asking where Aunt Juliana's famous Christmas cookies are. You have to come save Christmas." The irony was palpable. For years they had acted as if I was easily replaceable, as if anyone could produce elaborate holiday meals with minimal effort. Now they were discovering that cooking required skill, planning, and experience, qualities they had dismissed as unimportant when I provided them freely. At Beverly's house, her family welcomed me with genuine warmth that had nothing to do with my culinary abilities. Beverly's mother, Helen, hugged me and said, "We're so glad you're here, dear. Beverly tells us you're going through a difficult time with your family, but their loss is our gain." This was what family felt like. People who were happy to see you walk through the door, not people who were only interested in what you could produce in their kitchen. As we prepared brunch together, Helen asked about my work, my hobbies, my thoughts on a book she'd recently read. Nobody asked me to solve their cooking problems or produce miracle meals on demand. By afternoon, the messages from my family had taken on an increasingly desperate tone. Photos arrived showing disasters that would have been comical if they weren't so telling. A ham covered in what appeared to be burnt honey and clumps of brown sugar. Dinner rolls that looked like hockey pucks. A turkey that was simultaneously overcooked on the outside and raw in the center. But the most revealing message came from Uncle Vincent at 2 p.m. "Juliana, your family is falling apart without you. Your mother is having what I think might be a panic attack. Kenneth is on the phone with every restaurant in town trying to find somewhere that's open on Christmas. The kids are hungry and cranky. How could you do this to us?" That message crystallized everything wrong with my family's perspective. The disaster unfolding in their kitchen wasn't something I was doing to them. It was the natural consequence of their own choices and assumptions. For 2 decades, they had chosen not to learn basic cooking skills because they assumed I would always be available to handle everything. They had chosen to treat me as hired help, rather than including me as an equal family member. My absence wasn't the problem. Their complete dependence on my unpaid labor was the problem. At 3 p.m., I received a group text with a photo of my entire family sitting around the dining room table, eating what appeared to be sandwiches and potato chips from paper plates. The elegant Christmas china sat unused on the sideboard because they had no worthy meal to serve on it. Beverly found me looking at this photo and gently took my phone away. "They're learning an important lesson," she said. "Sometimes people need to experience consequences before they can understand the value of what they've taken for granted." She was right. This wasn't revenge. It was education. My family was finally discovering what Christmas preparation actually required, and more importantly, they were learning what they had lost when they chose to treat me as a service provider, rather than a beloved family member. The aftermath of that Christmas disaster created ripple effects that extended far beyond one ruined holiday meal. Robert and Diana faced months of social embarrassment as word spread through their church and neighborhood about their complete inability to host even a basic family gathering without their daughter's unpaid labor. Their reputation as gracious hosts, built entirely on my unacknowledged work, crumbled when friends and extended family witnessed them serving peanut butter sandwiches on Christmas Day. Kenneth and Patricia lost significant credibility when their own children began asking uncomfortable questions about why they had never learned to cook and why they had expected Aunt Juliana to work alone in the kitchen during every family celebration. Uncle Vincent and other relatives started declining invitations to future gatherings, knowing that the elaborate meals they had enjoyed for years were no longer guaranteed. The family's holiday traditions permanently changed as they struggled with basic cooking tasks they had taken for granted, while their social standing suffered when people learned they had treated their own daughter and sister as unpaid kitchen staff, rather than appreciating her generous contributions as acts of love. Sitting in my peaceful apartment that evening, surrounded by thoughtful gifts from Beverly's family and leftovers from a meal we had all prepared together with joy and laughter, I realized that my decision to step away from my family's exploitation had taught me the profound difference between people who value your presence and those who only value your services, and that sometimes the most generous gift we can give ourselves is the freedom to choose how we spend our precious time with people who truly cherish us. Looking back on my journey from unpaid family chef to empowered woman who chose her own holiday celebrations, I understood that my revenge had been nothing more than refusing to participate in my own exploitation. And sometimes that simple act of self-respect creates the most powerful transformation of all.